Good afternoon. Hope everybody's doing well today. My name is Harold Zobe, and I will actually it's my pleasure to be presenting today this session with courtesy of CGLCC. Have been kind enough to invite me, and I represent Enterprise Florida, and the topic of discussion for this session will be accessing the Canadian market for SMEs that are coming in internationally. So hopefully this session would be very helpful to everyone that's involved and everyone that's connected in providing resources to help you understand ways of entering the Canadian market, as well as the many, as we like to say, hoops that corporations and companies really need to navigate when on that path. Okay, so a bit about myself. I'm Deputy Director for Enterprise Florida, otherwise known as EFI Canada. What we do as an organization at EFI is really representing the state of Florida. The mission is to promote Florida as a state internationally. Our focus is primarily the Canadian market. I'm based in Quebec, Montreal, and my work is primarily with Canadian and Quebec, as well as quite a few companies out west as well in regions such as British Columbia, to help them understand opportunities for expansion, for trade, as well with Floridian companies. So Enterprise Florida as an entity is the primary economic development and trade entity for the state of Florida. We work with all the municipalities, all the counties in Florida, and we exist as a public-private partnership of both business as well as government leaders. And we work as well, as mentioned, statewide with a number of international offices, and this obviously being directly from the Canadian office. I myself have been working in the area of economic development for close to 12 years right now. My primary areas of focus have been working closely with businesses and helping them navigate and really access the resources that are often required to effectively expand and reconnect these businesses and business leaders primarily with the relevant bodies within the various MSAs or municipalities that they wish to explore for expansion, and we help them as well connect with the relevant bodies through direct engagements. So companies that are looking at Canada. First of all, Canada is a fantastic place to expand. It's a vibrant economy. Canada's economy was 3.3% below pre-pandemic levels and at the end of 2020. So this is as taken in 2020 December. But the 2021 forecast is a lot better. I think it can be said for many regions that 2020 is a year to write off and forget about, but we know that we will be talking about that year from a business perspective for a very, very long time to come. Despite that, there is a lot of optimism. So Canada as an economy has proven very resilient during the second wave of the COVID infections, with vaccinations ramping up and warmer weather around the corner. We see growth that's expected to accelerate well into summer and into Q3, and overall GDP is set to increase by 6.2% this year. So lots of reasons to be optimistic. We're looking at about a 5.8% expansion expected in not only this year, but 4% as well in 2022. Yeah. while the recovery itself, as you know, while we want to be optimistic, we know and should accept that the recovery will still take a while. So we still have a long way to go when it comes to recovering. We see that preliminary estimates show that the pace of growth, while accelerated in January, and provincial vaccination campaigns ramping up in 2021, there's a lot of reason to remain optimistic. We look at interest rate hikes and expectations really being on hold until the early part of 2023, which is, again, another reason to be optimistic, as well as inflation to remain at 2% target range through the medium term. In my direct work in dealing with economic development organizations and helping companies expand, the key metric, or at least the driver for a lot of that activity, is the ability to create jobs. It's a lot of optimism that's been showed so far, with approximately 80% of jobs that were lost in 2020 having been recovered. And that's expected, obviously, to continue on that trend as vaccinations continue to roll out and the economy continues to reopen. So let's talk a bit about doing business in Canada. Now, when we work with companies when it comes to exploring the Canadian market, the key thing that we help companies with and that we advise them with as well is doing the research. So assessing the opportunity. By the time that we speak with many of the companies, a lot of this has already been done. So we are looking at companies that have a strategic interest and objectives to establish within a region, and have identified certain opportunities that are now acting as key drivers for that expansion. So some of the areas that we advise companies to look into is things such as target demographics, understanding that Canada has 10 provinces as well as 3 territories, unlike the United States, which is broken up into 50 states. Canada is made up of these, we call it jurisdictions, which include more known provinces such as Ontario, Quebec, British Columbia, and our 3 territories being the Northwest, Nunavut, as well as Yukon. The geography may be different, but much like the United States, your target audience as a business will likely be scattered across the country instead of readily available in one particular region. So conducting a study to find out which existing businesses do well in these areas, what the opportunities in terms of customers, as well as basically synergies with your offering, is well advised in advance of moving into a region. Another thing to look at and examine is competition. It's always advisable to look at regional competition, what businesses already exist within the regions that you're looking to target. Look at how they price their services and offerings, and what their customer base actually looks like. So what is your competitive advantage, as well as would your business thrive in that particular region that you're considering? Currency is, we would say something that we advise against, kind of hedging your expansion and your strategic moves on because of those fluctuations. But the Bank of Canada offers business leaders and entrepreneurs use of currency at converter. Currently, dollar and Canadian has changed a bit with regards to the US currency, but it's crucial to keep in mind that in the existing currency of the Canadian dollar and in its exchange rate, when and planning to expand the business, especially if you are looking to both manufacture within Canada and export, as well as perhaps looking to leverage the local supply chain or perhaps even international supply chain at that point, or compete at an international level. When it comes to taxes, one key thing that's good to understand about Canada is that taxes are a blend of both federal as well as provincial components. So we in Canada have a VAT-like tax that includes federal components, GST, as well as provincial component, PST. In some provinces, including Ontario, the GST as well as the PST have been integrated to make what we call a harmonized tax, otherwise known as HST. So similarly, income tax rates may vary from province to province. So this is one of the factors that should be taken into account when deciding where you'd want to establish your business. Looking at cost of operations is always advised as well. The comprehensive cost of Canadian business operations is typically within about 14.5% less than operations within the United States for a number of factors. Obviously, one being currency, as well as other factors that are crucial to running a business, such as Canada's healthcare system, which is for a large part subsidized by the government, which in turn helps to lower business operating costs. So it's advisable to conduct research if that percentage continues to hold true, and consider all cost facets as well, which may include things such as your facility, so property costs, taxes within the jurisdictions that you're considering, labor costs as well, and then other things such as transportation and utilities, which will vary from province to province. One of the most important things to understand from a business point of view is the legal landscape. So understanding based on your company and the industries that you function in, what are the expectations and regulations of the territory or the province that you wish to establish in, and then as well, do some research with regards to the Canadian corporate law, the standards of businesses in Canada that are held to, as well as presuming running a business in that same area, as would be perhaps if you are a U.S. company considering the same sectors. So for us, when we work, obviously not being legal experts, we always leverage our relationships with the many law firms within Canada, and we advise as well, obviously, if companies do have internal legal support, to engage with them and have them look into the legalities and basically the legislation for running a business effectively within the Canadian market and in compliance. To expand a bit more on Canada's legal systems, again, we talked a little bit about the federal and provincial statutes that typically govern operating a business within Canada. To expand a bit more on this, the 10 provinces and 3 territories, certain matters such as healthcare and education are largely within the jurisdiction of each individual province. Other matters such as interprovincial trade are largely within the jurisdiction of the federal government. So while statutes vary from province to province, corporate law, employment law are largely similar across the country. This is with exception with Quebec. This is the only Canadian province that uses a civil law system. Similar to regions in the US, such as Louisiana, with the only civil law jurisdiction within the US, Quebec is the only civil law jurisdiction in Canada stemming from a French heritage, while the rest of the provinces stem from the English heritage. So it's important to explore the differences from a legal standpoint if you are looking at Quebec, because there's certainly a few more considerations to take into account when exploring Quebec. When it comes to taxation as well, the Canada Revenue Agency, otherwise known as the CRA, is the body that administers income tax system for the federal government and most provinces. The Federal and Provincial Income Tax Act set out liability for tax and on income. Corporations that are taxable in Canada pay a flat rate, which is the federal and provincial combined of that's about between 25 to 31% on active business income, and depending on the province. Both levels of government provide some relief to Canadian-controlled private corporations and corporations involved in manufacturing and processing. So if you within that sector, those would be your functions as a company entering Canada. There certainly would be some benefits from a tax standpoint. Talking about regulations, which we touched on, a bit, as well as privacy. Canada's main privacy laws apply to companies is federal. So this is different from the taxation law, which varies from, can vary from province to province. But we do as well have some provinces that have put into place some legislation that differs slightly than the federal level. So while these may be substantially similar, they might contain additional requirements that businesses targeting customers within those provinces need to comply with. One of these, and we'll just maybe skip to that quite quickly, is the anti-spam law. So this is one that we advise many companies about because it's one that they typically would not be familiar with or as being a law that's in place. CASL, or Canada's anti-spam law or legislation, is a federal law that basically is in place to help or aims to help businesses stay competitive in a global digital marketplace. So CASL itself is the law that's dealing with spam and other electronic threats, and then is in place to protect both the consumers as well as the businesses from this misuse of digital technology. So that's one thing to be cognizant of if you are looking to conduct business within Canada, be it expanding your marketing initiatives or sales and so on and so forth. It definitely needs to be taken into account as a business that's looking to grow within the region. Okay. Regulatory laws vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, as well as from industry to industry. So this is highly dependent on the industries that you function in, as well as where you'd look to settle as a business. In addition to adhering to the jurisdiction of incorporation, so where you settle, most businesses, say certain businesses, would need to comply with industry as well as product-specific regulations within Canada. For example, banks, companies that function in the financial services and financial sector, banks, trusts, loan companies, insurance companies as well, are subject to separate legislations. And then other industries as well, such as broadcasting, telecom, transportation, mining, energy, and food and drugs are specifically regulated as well. So this is no different, I think, than any other country that is conducting or thriving in these particular sectors. So other laws to explore as well, and we'd highlight labor and employment law. In Canada, it's a complex mix of contract, statute, as well as common law. And in Quebec, as we mentioned before, civil law. So employment law in Canada is generally regulated by each province, except for federally regulated industries such as banks, telecom, railways, and airlines. And then you can look into franchise law and immigration law if you are looking at perhaps moving some staff at the initial point of incorporation to run your business. As well, we come across quite a few companies with that in mind. They would be looking at leveraging some of the opportunities presented by Canada's, I'd say, friendlier immigration laws, which allows companies things such as intercompany transfer, which makes it easier to move staff into either start up the business or perhaps manage the business at the longer term. So we could talk a bit about the actual act of incorporating a business. The many avenues that companies take when it comes to this, depending on their strategy, depending on where they're at with regards to their market presence or where they want to be really with their market presence and their customer base within Canada. So they could be looking at corporations, which is what we see the most of. And within that, they could look at either a subsidiary or a branch. And we'll talk a bit about the difference between those two. Companies as well could be looking at partnerships, either for distribution, sales, manufacturing, and so on and so forth. And joint ventures, trusts, sole proprietorships, as well as cooperatives. So in Canada, most of our clients, or let's say in Canada, but from what I come across in my work, the bulk of the companies that we work with would typically be looking at setting up a form of corporation. So the question here would be two questions, really. First of all, would it be a federal or provincial incorporation? And would you be looking at a branch or a subsidiary? Okay. We come across more frequently companies that are looking at a Canadian subsidiary. So these would typically incorporate what we refer to as a standard Canadian corporation. This is unlike in the US where companies have to determine whether to establish a C Corp, an S Corp, an LLC. In Canada, the choice is quite simple. In most provinces, the only option is a standard corporation. The standard corporation provides limited liability and is a separate legal entity from its parent company. This is good, but some clients as well might actually choose to establish an unlimited liability corporation, otherwise known as ULC. And both provinces of British Columbia, as well as Nova Scotia, allow the creation of ULCs. The difference between these is that they do not require a resident director in Canada to incorporate, while the ULCs as well are taxed the same as a standard corporation. So there's some sort of advantage there depending on your current company structure. As well, you find foreign tax reasons that a company might choose to go that route. When we look at some, for example, US businesses that we work with, that come into Canada, the choice is quite clearly defined by one, their goal, as well as their current situation. Okay. example, especially for some US companies that incentivize businesses to establish a ULC, or we'd be looking at, instead of a standard corporation, there's no difference from at least Canadian tax perspective between the ULC as well as the standard. So these are some of the considerations that you need to take into account as a business coming in to Canada. Um, Primarily your corporate name. So you need to decide in advance, as well as checking basically, is there any conflict? So again, this is a point where we'd advise consulting with a law firm within Canada to help through this process. Deciding whether you'd want to establish at a federal level, of a provincial level. The key determinant for that is where you would wish to conduct business. Okay, so typically being able to establish at a provincial level does not limit the company from conducting business across the rest of Canada, but there are certain limitations that you'd come into. For example, if you want to conduct business in Quebec, then there are a lot of customizations you have to do, for example, within your product, certain things that need to be taken into account, such as labeling and so on and so forth. At the federal level, you would be able to basically work across the country as well. Okay. There has to be a registered office address that's provided during the incorporation process, and naming of the incorporators, so the people who are named as the people conducting the act. There also needs to be declaration of directors. Typically, you'd look at 25% of directors needing to be resident within Canada, as well as a law. And again, being able to bypass that with establishing in British Columbia and other provinces such as Nova Scotia, where that wouldn't be a requirement. You need to take into account intellectual property as well. It's very important for companies to be able to protect, their products, their, basically their commodities, and again, another service that a well-versed law firm could provide for any business. When we look at your corporate structure as well, so you need to take into account as to where your management would be, who's going to be placed in Canada, and again, coming back to immigration law, will you be moving people into Canada as well to actually run the business? One thing that we could talk about as well is the availability of support programs. So incentives, support programs that are in place to help businesses basically cut costs to enter the market, and to do so efficiently as well as cost effectively. One of the, I'd say the largest programs that many companies that I work with look to leverage is a program called SHRED. So SHRED is a scientific research and experimental development, tax credit program within Canada, which incentivizes innovation, research, and development on Canadian soil. So, in other words, if I'm a company and I'm expanding into Canada and I'm conducting my research outside of Canada, I cannot claim a tax credit for those R&D activities. So it's a program that encourages companies to conduct their R&D on Canadian soil, and the benefits from that are quite significant. The number of organizations that you could look into, such as Invest Canada, as well as BDC, to look into SHRED and what the benefits would be for your business. A lot of the funding as well does come at the regional level. So again, this is another reason to take into account, where am I going to establish my business, and what would be the benefits from an incentive standpoint, from a labor standpoint, from a cost standpoint as well. So look at many provinces, many municipalities as well that are able to create uh, very attractive incentive programs that encourage companies to settle in their regions as well. Most of the programs of financial incentives and other programs within Canada are also related to labor. So programs that are in place to encourage workforce development, hiring, training, as well as education, and there's certain tax credits that could be applied to that. So it would be great to look into that as well if you are a business looking to expand into the Canadian market. And then there'll be other industry specific tax credits. You mentioned a bit about the ability to leverage incentives for manufacturing within Canada, for assembly, as well as again conducting research. And these may change from time to time based on industries that are currently thriving and have that opportunity to encourage basically business migration into the Canadian market. The great thing about Canada as well is the free trade agreements. So Canada has 14 free trade agreements. These cover about 60% of the global GDP. Most recently, we had the restructuring of what was previously known as NAFTA, as well as what we have as well, which is a clear advantage, especially for US businesses that want to manufacture and supply the European market. We have a program or a trade agreement called CETA, which is between Canada and the EU nations. Okay. So with these trade agreements, we're able to access 51 countries and 1.5 billion in terms of a target audience of consumers globally. So with that, we'll conclude that. So quite frankly, it's quite difficult to summarize all this information into a 30-minute session. There's certainly a lot more that we could have discussed, and this discussion typically lasts hours. And it definitely is not a one-stop conversation. So there's lots more information available. We're happy to provide the resources to access that information if you are a business and looking to expand into the Canadian market. And certainly we're happy to facilitate those introductions as well. So I certainly look forward to any questions, as well as perhaps any follow-up to further explore the opportunities that you might have in consideration. Certainly feel free to provide any questions if you have any. Otherwise, we'd be happy as well to again follow up. I am available for discussions through my LinkedIn, I believe, which I'm happy to share as well as directly via email as well. Yeah, so there seems to be a question with regards to cybersecurity, cyber and privacy law. In terms of being able to expand on that, it's something that's in place to ultimately to protect businesses that are considering expanding to Canada, and companies that are resident within Canada. It's a relatively new law as well. It hasn't been in place for that long. So Canada just recently adopted that with regards to Castle as well. And yeah, in fact, it's such a broad law. I'm happy to perhaps circle back to explain a bit more about that as well. Yeah, so it doesn't seem as though we have any other questions. So again, we're happy to uh, address any questions that do come up at a later stage. Otherwise, if that's it, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank CG LCC for the gracious opportunity to partake in this. We certainly look forward to continuing the collaboration, with the businesses, as well as the different chambers that we work very closely with to continue providing the services that we do. It's been a great pleasure hosting this. I trust and hope that we're all, as well, it's still at this point, practicing safety, and we certainly look forward and are eager to opening up the economies again, being able to travel, being able to meet face to face. And at this point, I'd like to wish everybody the best in growth and the best in business. And I appreciate you taking the time to partake in this session today.